At my wife's memorial scholarship dinner, my daughter stood beside her new husband, lifted a glass, and told 200 people I had agreed to sign away Windmere House by Monday morning. I had agreed to no such thing. I was still holding the program with Eleanor's photograph on the cover when the room applauded. Then my 10-year-old granddaughter crawled beneath the linen tablecloth, pressed a blue place card into my palm, and whispered, "Grandpa, don't sign the blue packet. Mom's husband can make Grandma talk from the dead." For a moment, I thought grief had finally done what everyone feared it might do. I thought I had misheard her. I thought a child had misunderstood some adult conversation, twisted a phrase, built a monster out of shadows. Then Ruby looked over her shoulder toward the stage, where Grant Ellison was smiling with one hand resting on my daughter's back, and she whispered something worse. He played her voice in the study. "Grandma said you wanted to sell everything. But Grandma is gone." That was the moment the applause around me stopped sounding like applause. It sounded like doors closing. I did not know yet about the fake phone calls, the forged trustee forms, the doctor who had never examined me but was prepared to call me confused, or the small blue packet that would have erased 37 years of my family's work in less than 6 signatures. I did not know my daughter had been turned against me with recordings of her dead mother's voice. I did not know my granddaughter had been hiding pieces of evidence inside a broken dollhouse because she was the only person in that house young enough to be ignored and old enough to understand fear. But I knew one thing. Eleanor had been dead for 11 months. And if someone was using her voice, then grief had become a weapon. Before this story is over, I am going to tell you how a man tried to steal a house, a trust, a daughter, and a dead woman's memory. I am going to tell you why the blue packet mattered. I am going to tell you how a little girl saved her family by noticing the one sound a liar forgot to fake. And I am going to tell you how the signing ceremony Grant planned as my surrender became the night every secret in his life walked into the light. My name is Walter Hale. I am 72 years old. For 46 years, I ran the Harbor Ledger, a small weekly newspaper in Briar Glen, Connecticut, the kind of town where people claim they hate gossip but still know exactly whose porch light stayed on too late. My father bought the Ledger in 1968 with borrowed money, a cracked printing press, and the stubborn belief that small towns deserved to see themselves honestly, even when honesty made everybody uncomfortable. I took it over at 26. I learned early that corruption rarely enters a room wearing a mask. Most of the time, it enters holding a folder. It smiles. It speaks in soft language. It says transition, continuity, preservation, family planning, best interests. Then it places a document on the table and waits for tired people to sign away something they do not understand. That was the lesson of my working life. Read the small print. Follow the money. Never trust a person who rushes you while pretending to help. And still, when danger came from my own family, it came through the one door I had left unlocked. My grief. Eleanor and I had been married 48 years. She was not a dramatic woman. She did not raise her voice unless someone endangered a child, underwatered her roses, or described canned soup as homemade. She taught music at the elementary school for 31 years. Every December, she organized a winter concert where half the children sang too loudly, 3 forgot the words, 1 cried into a paper snowflake, and every parent believed the whole thing was beautiful because Eleanor stood in front of them like Patience had learned to conduct. She had a laugh that started small and then surprised even her. She kept pencils in every drawer. She underlined books in blue ink. She believed the house should have one room where anybody could sit without asking permission. That room was Windmere House. Windmere sat on a ridge above the marsh, a white clapboard house with green shutters, a slate roof, and a back porch where you could see the tide move through the reeds at dusk. It had belonged to Eleanor's aunt, then to Eleanor, then to both of us after we married. We raised our daughter Mara there. We held neighborhood suppers there. We hosted music lessons there when the school budget got cut. When Eleanor became sick, she made me promise that after we were both gone, Windmere would not become another luxury renovation with a stone wall, a gate code, and a name like Saltgrass Residences. She wanted it to become a scholarship house. A place where young music teachers could stay during summer training. A place where children who could not afford private lessons could learn anyway. A place that still heard noise. That was Eleanor's word. Noise. Don't let some rich couple buy silence with our life, she told me from the hospital bed in our dining room, because she refused to die upstairs where the windows faced the wrong direction. I promised her. I meant it. Then she died, and for a while I became the kind of man who pays bills, nods at visitors, answers questions too slowly, and mistakes functioning for living. Mara worried about me. That much was real. She is my only child. 43 years old. Smart, quick, capable, with Eleanor's eyes and my habit of making a decision before everyone else has finished pretending there are options. She ran a non-profit that helped families navigate housing after medical debt. She knew forms, courts, county offices, and the particular smell of institutions that call themselves compassionate while making scared people stand in line. If anyone should have spotted paperwork being used as a weapon, it was Mara. That is why what happened next still hurts. Not because she was foolish. Because she was tired. Because grief makes smart people hungry for anyone who speaks with certainty. Grant Ellison arrived in her life 6 months after Eleanor died. He did not arrive loudly. That would have warned us. He came in polished, useful, attentive. He fixed a broken grant application in one evening. He knew which donors to call. He remembered Ruby's school schedule. He sent soup when Mara had the flu, then stayed to repair a loose cabinet handle without making a show of it. He was 47, handsome in a controlled way, with silver at his temples, expensive glasses, and the kind of voice that made weak ideas sound financed. He said he worked in legacy planning. Not estate planning, legacy planning. That should have bothered me more. Anyone who improves a plain job title usually wants to charge more for it or hide part of it. But Mara looked less alone when he entered a room. Ruby liked him at first. And I was trying not to become the bitter old father who turns every new man into a threat. So when Mara told me she and Grant were engaged after 4 months, I said the ordinary things. Fast, isn't it? Are you sure? He seems kind. Your mother would want you happy. That last sentence was the one I regret most. Because Grant learned quickly that Eleanor's memory still had authority in our family. He learned that if he attached Eleanor's name to something, Mara listened differently. So did I. That is how the first fracture opened. Not with a threat. With a suggestion. Grant told Mara that Windmere's scholarship plan was beautiful but legally fragile. He said old promises often collapse under probate pressure. He said sentimental structures fail when documents are not modernized. He said, your father means well, but your mother deserved better than informal intentions. That line reached Mara because it sounded protective of Eleanor. Then he began asking about the trust. Who held authority? Who had signing power? Whether I had updated beneficiaries since Eleanor's death. Whether my doctor had ever noted cognitive concerns. Whether Mara had durable authority if anything happened. All normal questions in the right room. All dangerous questions in the wrong mouth. I gave short answers. Grant smiled through them. He was good at that. He could make resistance look like an adorable old habit. At dinner one Sunday, he asked where the original Windmere deed was kept. I said, in a place safer than dinner conversation. Ruby laughed. Mara did not. Grant just lifted his wine and said, a newspaperman never reveals sources. I respect that. It was smooth. Too smooth. But suspicion is easy to excuse when you are the only one feeling it. I told myself I was being territorial. I told myself Eleanor's death had made me sharper around the edges. I told myself Mara deserved room to build a life without me measuring every beam. Then came the scholarship dinner. It was Eleanor's idea before she died. 1 year after her passing, we would gather donors, former students, teachers, town people, and anyone who had ever been bullied into singing harmony by my wife. We would raise the first full round of scholarship money. We would announce the legal path to turn Windmere House into a permanent foundation property. That was the plan. The room that night looked exactly the way Eleanor would have hated and secretly enjoyed. Too many flowers. Too many candles. Too many people saying things like legacy, impact, and transformative generosity while eating salmon that needed salt. Her photograph stood near the stage. She was laughing in it, not posed, holding a stack of sheet music against the wind. I kept looking at that photograph because it was easier than looking at all the people who kept touching my arm and telling me how strong I was. Strong is a strange word to use for someone who simply has not fallen down in public. Mara wore a navy dress. Ruby wore silver shoes that flashed under the table. Grant wore a charcoal suit and moved through the room as if he had designed the evening himself. Which, as I later learned, he mostly had. Halfway through dinner, after a former student sang one of Eleanor's favorite songs badly enough to make me miss her with new violence, Grant stepped to the microphone. Mara stood beside him. I thought he was going to thank donors. Instead he said, "Tonight we honor not only Eleanor Hale's memory, but also Walter's courage in allowing that memory to evolve." The room softened around that sentence. People love hearing that grief has become evolution. It lets them applaud without asking what is being sacrificed. Grant continued. After many family conversations, Walter has agreed that Windmere House can serve more people through a partnership with the Ellison Renewal Group. By Monday morning, the property transfer documents will begin the process of creating the Eleanor Hale Center for Renewal and Residence, a multi-use retreat space carrying her name into the future. Applause rose before my mind finished rejecting the sentence. Partnership. Transfer. Residence. Monday morning. My daughter was smiling, but it was not a comfortable smile. It was the smile of someone trying to believe she was witnessing generosity instead of surrender. I looked at her and mouthed, "What is this?" She did not understand. Or maybe she thought I did not. That was when Ruby disappeared under the table. I felt a small hand on my knee. Then a folded blue place card slid into my palm. I lowered my hand without looking. Ruby's whisper came from beneath the linen. "Grandpa, don't sign the blue packet. Mom's husband can make Grandma talk from the dead." I looked down. Her face was half hidden in shadow. Her eyes were enormous. Children look different when they are asking adults to finally become useful. I whispered, "What did you say?" She glanced toward the stage. Grant was still talking. The room was still clapping. Mara was still holding a glass she had not drunk from. Ruby said, "He played her voice in the study. Grandma said you wanted to sell everything. But Grandma is gone." Then she shoved something else into my hand. A tiny brass key. "Dollhouse attic," she whispered. "After dessert." Then she crawled back to her chair so quickly that anyone watching would have thought she had dropped a fork. I sat there with the blue card in one hand and the brass key in the other while Grant accepted applause for a decision I had not made. That is the first lesson. When a room applauds your surrender, do not stand up too quickly. Watch first. I watched Grant. I watched Mara. I watched the donors. I watched the two lawyers near the back who did not clap as much as everyone else because they were busy looking at me. I watched a woman I did not know, gray suit, pearl earrings, black folder on her lap, lean toward a man from the town board and whisper something while glancing at my table. And I watched Ruby. She sat with both hands folded, face forward, behaving too carefully. Careful children are rarely careful by nature. They are careful by training. Grant ended his speech by saying, "Walter, I know this step is emotional. But Eleanor's voice has guided all of us." The room turned toward me. 200 faces. Expectation. Pity. Admiration. The old newspaperman, brave enough to let go. I stood. Not because I agreed. Because when people are trying to write you into a story, sometimes the first defense is to stay inside the scene long enough to learn the plot. I lifted my water glass. Eleanor loved music, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. She also hated vague announcements. So before I say anything more, I would like to see every document connected to this beautiful evolution. A ripple moved through the room. Small. Almost invisible. Grant's smile did not change. Only his eyes did. "Of course," he said. "We have everything ready for you after dinner. No pressure tonight. No pressure tonight." Spoken in front of 200 witnesses after announcing Monday morning transfer documents. I smiled back. "Good," I said. "I read slowly now. Comes with age." Laughter moved through the room. Grant laughed too. Mara looked relieved. Ruby did not. Ruby knew the joke was a door. After dessert, I excused myself to the restroom and went the other way. Windmere House had been turned into the dinner venue that night, because the donors wanted to see the property they were supposedly supporting. The downstairs rooms were open. The upstairs rooms were roped off. Ruby's dollhouse stood in the old sunroom where Eleanor used to teach piano to children whose parents paid in produce, favors, or promises. It was not really a dollhouse anymore. It had been Eleanor's childhood toy, then Mara's, then Ruby's. 3 feet high, faded green roof, tiny shutters, missing chimney. The attic door had a small brass lock. My hands shook more than I liked as I fitted the key. Inside was a folded napkin, a flash drive shaped like a pink cat, 3 printed emails, and 1 torn strip from a document with my name on it. At the top of the strip were the words, "Capacity Continuity Review." Below that, a line read, "Observed confusion, date recall inconsistency, suggest temporary trustee transition to protect donor intent." I felt my body go cold. Not because the language was dramatic. Because it was professional. Professional lies are harder to kill. I pocketed everything and locked the dollhouse again. When I returned to the dining room, Grant was standing near Mara with one hand on her elbow. Not holding her. Just marking ownership in a way polite people do not name. He looked at me and smiled. "Everything all right, Walter?" "Too much coffee," I said. "Happens to all of us." "Not to Eleanor," I replied. "She said coffee made people overconfident." Grant's smile held. Mara looked away. That small look told me more than any argument could have. She had heard Eleanor's voice recently. Or what she believed was Eleanor's voice. I needed to know how. I did not confront him that night. That took more discipline than I had expected. There is a kind of rage that wants to become immediate because immediate feels clean. But clean is not the same as useful. So I thanked guests. I shook hands. I accepted condolences from people who somehow managed to mourn my wife and celebrate the theft of her house in the same breath. When the last guests left, Grant asked if I wanted to review the packet. He was holding it then. Blue cover. Silver clip. The blue packet. It looked harmless. That was the ugliest part. Most disasters look harmless until your signature gives them teeth. "Tomorrow," I said. Grant tilted his head. "The timeline is tight. The attorneys need Monday filings. Then tomorrow is generous." Mara stepped in quickly. "Dad, we just want to make sure Mom's wishes are protected." Her voice cracked on Mom. Grant had chosen his battlefield well. I looked at my daughter. So do I. For 1 second her face changed. Confusion. Hurt. Maybe doubt. Then Grant said softly, "This is exactly why Eleanor wanted us to move before uncertainty made it harder." There it was again. Eleanor as authority. Eleanor as pressure. Eleanor as a voice he could use because she was not alive to correct him. I nodded. "Tomorrow," I said again. Then I left my own house as if I were a guest at someone else's theft. I drove home through roads I knew too well and trusted too little. The flash drive in my pocket felt heavier than it was. Every streetlight looked like a witness. Every passing car looked like Grant had sent it. Grief makes the world blurry. Suspicion makes it sharp again. At my kitchen table, I took out the items from the dollhouse attic and laid them in a row. Flash drive. Emails. Document strip. Blue place card with Ruby's handwriting on the back. She had written 3 words. Not grandma's breath. That was a child's way of saying what adults call voice synthesis. She did not know the term. She knew the sound was wrong. I plugged the flash drive into an old laptop that had survived 2 office floods and one intern who once spilled clam chowder into the keyboard. There were 4 files. Audio 1. Audio 2. Study video. Blue packet picture. I opened the first audio file. Eleanor's voice filled my kitchen. "Mara, sweetheart, if you are hearing this, it means your father is struggling to let go. He loves the house, but he promised me he would use it for healing, not sentiment. Grant understands the structure. Trust him. Help your father be brave." I knocked the chair backward standing up. Not because the words convinced me. Because the voice was close enough to wound. It was Eleanor's tone. Her warmth. Her little breath before Mara's name. But Ruby was right. It was not Eleanor's breath. My wife had a tiny catch in her voice when she said Mara because our daughter had almost died during delivery and Eleanor never said the name without remembering fear and gratitude together. That catch was missing. The recording had the sound. Not the scar. I played the second audio. Walter knows more than he says. He will resist in public and agree in private. He was always proud that way. Do not let his stubbornness undo the plan. I sat down slowly. The dead do not flatter criminals by predicting their convenience. The dead do not revise promises to benefit men they never met. Then I opened the video. It was shaky, filmed from low behind a half-open study door. Ruby's height. Grant sat at Eleanor's old desk with headphones on. A laptop screen glowed in front of him. On the desk lay scraps of printed speech, phrases Eleanor had written years ago for school concerts, letters, donor notes. Grant clicked something. Eleanor's voice said, "Trust him. Trust him. Trust him." He listened. Adjusted a slider. Played it again. "Trust Grant." He smiled. Not broadly. Just enough. That smile changed the room around me. Some smiles are proof of intention. I opened the blue packet picture. Ruby had photographed the cover and the first page. Windmere House Transitional Authority Packet. Trustee Continuity. Donor Intent Alignment. Capacity Protection Addendum. My name was typed where signatures belonged. Mara's name too. Grant's firm listed as administrative partner. Ellison Renewal Group. There are moments when fear becomes useful because it clears the desk of everything except the next necessary action. I copied the files 3 times. 1 external drive. 1 cloud account. 1 email to myself with a subject line so boring nobody would open it. Boiler repair estimate. Then I called Harriet Sloan. Harriet had been my managing editor for 20 years. She was 68, smoked for 30 years, quit for 2 weeks, started again only during election seasons, then claimed that did not count because politics was a medical condition. She could smell a forged public statement from across a parking lot. When she answered, she said, "If this is about that ridiculous announcement tonight, I already hated it. It is worse than ridiculous. Then come over. Bring documents. And if you are about to confess to murder, use my back door." That was Harriet. The next morning, her dining table became a newsroom again. Coffee. Legal pads. 3 laptops. A printer that jammed every 6th page and was cursed into cooperation. Harriet listened to the recordings without expression. Then she played them again. Then she closed the laptop and said, "That is not Eleanor." I had been holding myself together until that sentence. I looked away. Harriet did not comfort me. Good editors do not comfort first. They stabilize facts. "How do you know?" I asked. Because Eleanor hated the phrase healing structure. She once edited it out of a hospital brochure with a blue pen at a fundraiser. Said it sounded like a yoga mat had joined a zoning board. I laughed once. It hurt. Then Harriet pointed at the document strip. "This is elder capacity language. Not full guardianship yet, but close enough to prepare the field. They are not just taking Windmere. They are making you unreliable before you object. Can they do that fast?" Fast? No. Quietly. Yes. Especially if your daughter signs a supporting affidavit. That hit the table harder than the recordings. Mara would never. Harriet looked at me with the terrible kindness of someone who has watched people sign things under emotional pressure. Mara thinks her mother asked her to. I stood and paced. Harriet let me. After a minute she said, "Who is Grant Ellison really?" That was the correct question. Not who did he say he was. Who was he on paper before he entered our family? We started where journalists start. Public records. Business filings. Court indexes. Property transfers. Old articles. Licensing boards. Charity registration databases. Harriet searched like a woman peeling paint off a rotten wall. Grant Ellison existed. That was disappointing. Fraud is easier when names are fake. Real names build real confidence. He had worked with 3 legacy planning firms in 12 years. 2 closed quietly. One renamed itself after a civil settlement that never mentioned fraud directly but circled it like a dog around a snake. His current company, Ellison Renewal Group, had been formed 14 months earlier. Its stated purpose was nonprofit property transition, donor intent preservation, senior founder continuity planning, and retreat-oriented social impact development. Harriet read that description aloud and said, every word in that sentence should be arrested. Then she found the first pattern. A widow named Judith Markham in Rhode Island owned a coastal cottage intended for a literacy nonprofit. After working with a legacy consultant tied to Grant's previous firm, she signed capacity support documents and transferred management authority to an administrative partner. The cottage became a private rental retreat. Judith died 2 years later in assisted living. No criminal charges. Then a retired teacher in Vermont. Arthur Bell. He had planned to leave his farmhouse to a rural arts program. Documents shifted authority to a renewal trust. His niece challenged it. Lost. The farmhouse became a corporate retreat with 6 bedrooms and a stone yoga patio. Then a church camp outside Hudson. Then a music school building in New Jersey. Different firms. Different partners. Same language. Legacy. Renewal. Continuity. Founder transition. And in 3 cases, relatives had complained that elderly owners seemed to change their minds after hearing private messages from dead spouses, dead siblings, or old mentors. Harriet stopped reading. We looked at each other. He has done this before, I said. Maybe. Maybe. Maybe means we need enough proof that his lawyer cannot turn us into grieving amateurs with a grudge. She was right. I hated how often right people make you feel slower. By evening, we had a map of Grant's world. Ellison Renewal Group. 3 partner attorneys. 1 physician named Dr. Philip Rask who specialized in cognitive continuity assessments. 2 notaries who appeared in too many contested elder planning documents. A shell nonprofit called the Eleanor Hale Center for Renewal and Residence, formed 3 weeks before the dinner. 3 weeks. Before I had heard a single word about any transfer. My wife's name had been registered into a corporate container before my family was even told there would be a container. That is when grief turned into something harder. Not rage exactly. Rage is hot. This was colder. Purpose with a pulse. At 9 that night, Ruby called me from Mara's phone. I answered with my heart in my throat. Grandpa. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm here, sweetheart. Are you safe? A pause. A door closed somewhere in the background. Mom is crying in the bathroom. Grant says you are making her sick. I closed my eyes. Listen to me carefully. Do not argue with him. Do not tell him what you gave me. I didn't. Good girl. Another pause. Then, did Grandma really say those things? That question went through me. How do you tell a child the adults around her have made a puppet out of the dead? No, I said. That was not Grandma. Ruby exhaled so shakily that I nearly stood up though there was nowhere to go. I knew it, she whispered. Grandma always breathed before she said Mom's name. There it was. The one sound a machine forgot. A child's grief had preserved the truth better than any expert system. Ruby, I said, is there more? Yes. Where? The piano bench. But Grant keeps the study locked now. Harriet, sitting across from me, wrote piano bench on a pad and underlined it twice. What is in the bench? I asked. Grandma's blue notebooks. Grant took pages out and scanned them. He made Mom listen. Mom got quiet after that. I heard footsteps through the phone. Ruby whispered fast. I have to go. If he asks, I wanted the cookie recipe. Then the line went dead. Harriet stared at me. The child is 10 and already understands cover stories. I know. That house is not safe. I know. Knowing is not a plan. Again, right. Again, irritating. The next morning I did something Grant expected me to do. I called him. He answered on the second ring. Walter. I am glad you called. Mara has been very upset. There is a special arrogance in men who begin conversations by assigning emotional damage to your resistance. I do not want Mara upset, I said. None of us do. I reviewed part of the packet. A pause. Small. Controlled. And perhaps I reacted poorly. I could almost hear him smile. Grief makes transitions difficult. No judgment here. I want to talk. Privately. At Windmere. Tonight. Of course. Bring the blue packet. I will. And Mara. Another pause. This one less controlled. It may be better to spare her another tense conversation. If this is Eleanor's wish, our daughter should be there. He could not argue with that without stepping outside his own lie. 7 o'clock, he said. 7. When I hung up, Harriet said, that sounded like surrender. Good. You are not going alone. No. I am going with a recorder. You are going with me in the driveway, a lawyer on call, and a deputy who owes me because I never printed the truth about his brother's boat insurance. You make friendship sound like extortion. It is only extortion when strangers do it. At 7 that evening, Windmere House looked like itself again. No donors. No candles. No scholarship speeches. Just the porch light, the marsh, and the piano visible through the front window. I arrived 10 minutes early and used the back door. The study lock was new. Grant had changed it already. That told me he was afraid of what the room contained. The piano bench, however, was in the sunroom. He had overlooked it. That was the problem with thieves who think in documents. They forget furniture can testify. Inside the bench were Eleanor's blue notebooks. 6 of them. Teaching notes. Concert plans. Letters she never sent. Drafts of speeches. And gaps. Pages sliced cleanly out with a blade. Near the bottom, tucked into the back of one notebook, was a note in Eleanor's handwriting. Walter, if I go before you finish the trust, do not let anyone turn Windmere into a retreat for people who already have places to rest. Children first. Teachers second. Music always. No private residence. No sale. No exceptions. I read it twice. Then a third time. Eleanor had already known the world would try to improve her wish into something profitable. I photographed the note, slid it into a plastic sleeve from Harriet's evidence kit, and returned the notebook exactly where I found it. Grant arrived at 7 on the dot. Mara came with him. Ruby was not there. That scared me until Mara said Ruby was at a friend's house. I saw Grant's jaw tighten when she said it. He had not liked losing that piece from the board. We sat in the dining room. The same room where Eleanor had died. That felt obscene and useful. Grant placed the blue packet on the table. Mara looked exhausted. Not just tired. Eroded. Her eyes moved to the piano, then back to the packet. She knew something was wrong but had been told the wrong name for it. Grant began gently. Walter, I want to start by saying none of this works without your dignity. My dignity? Your willingness to put Eleanor's mission above attachment. Attachment is a funny word for a promise. His smile thinned. Mara said, Dad, please. That please hurt. Not because it was weak. Because it was familiar. She had said it as a teenager when she wanted me not to argue with Eleanor about letting her drive alone at night. Now she was asking me not to fight a ghost assembled from stolen sound. Grant opened the packet. The first form simply acknowledges intent. No transfer yet. The second establishes continuity review. The third appoints temporary administrative oversight if the family determines Walter needs support during implementation. Temporary administrative oversight. The words came clean. The meaning stank. And who determines that? And who determines that? I asked. You, Mara, and a qualified physician. Dr. Philip Rask? Grant looked up. Only for half a second. But there it was. He is excellent. He has never met me. Initial reviews can be documentary. Can they? Mara rubbed her forehead. Dad, this is not about calling you incompetent. Grant touched her hand. No one is using that word. No one needed to. The room had already been prepared for it. I leaned back. Did Eleanor tell you I would resist in public and agree in private? Mara went still. Grant did not. That difference mattered. The recordings were private, he said softly. A gift she left. We used them because she wanted guidance to survive her death. There it was. Used them. Not found them. Not listened to them. Used them. Where did she leave them? I asked. Walter, Grant said, warning hidden in warmth. Where? Mara looked at him. For the first time that night, her confusion aimed in his direction. Grant? He turned to her quickly. Your mother left materials in multiple places. Journals, old recordings, letters. I assembled them because you were too raw to do it yourself. Assembled. Another word doing too much work. I looked at Mara. Did you ever hear one full original recording? Not a clip. Not a file Grant played. The original. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Grant stepped in. This is not productive. It is for me. Because you are searching for reasons to reject what you already know is right. Mara whispered, Grant, just answer him. That was the first crack I could hear. Grant exhaled like a patient man being forced to indulge foolishness. The files were converted from mixed sources. Eleanor's voice notes were old. Some were damaged. I cleaned them. Cleaned them how? Audio restoration. Who did it? A vendor. Name? He looked at me then. Fully. There was no smile. Walter, be careful. There is a difference between healthy skepticism and paranoid escalation. There it was. The first time he put the word near me. Paranoid. Mara heard it too. Her face tightened. I stood slowly. I need tea. Grant blinked. Now. Eleanor died in this room. If we are going to use her name, I would like tea. Mara's eyes filled instantly. Grant could not object without looking cruel. I walked to the kitchen. Not for tea. For distance. And because the recorder in my shirt had captured enough for one night. Harriet texted while I stood by the sink. Got it. He's scared. Keep him talking. I returned with 3 cups. Grant did not drink his. People who control rooms rarely trust what they did not pour. The rest of the conversation moved carefully. He showed me signature pages. I asked simple questions. He grew smoother. Mara grew quieter. By the end, I said I would consider signing at a public family foundation meeting on Monday. Grant liked that. Too much. Public continuity can reassure donors, he said. Exactly. He thought I was giving him spectacle. He did not understand yet that spectacle belongs to whoever controls the truth on the screen. After they left, Harriet came inside through the back door with her phone already open. We have him admitting the files were assembled and cleaned. Not enough, but good. Mara heard it. That may matter more. Where is Ruby? Safe. I called the mother of the friend. Real sleepover. No Grant. I sat down. Only then did I realize how tired I was. Harriet placed Eleanor's note on the table. This is your anchor. Everything else is weather. I looked at the handwriting. No private residence. No sale. No exceptions. My wife had always been better at final sentences than I was. The next 2 days moved like weather before a storm. Grant became kinder. That alarmed me more than anger would have. He sent messages about unity, healing, and making Eleanor proud. He copied Mara on every one. He offered to bring lunch. He sent me a scanned agenda for Monday's public foundation meeting. At the bottom was a line item I had not approved. Execution of Windmere Transitional Authority Packet. Execution. Legal language can be unintentionally honest. Mara called me Saturday night. For a long time she said nothing. I could hear water running, a bathroom fan, the hollow sound of a phone held too close because someone is afraid of being heard. Dad, she said finally, did Mom ever say Grant's name to you? Never. Not once. She died before you met him. Silence. Then, I know. I just needed to hear you say it. That broke my heart in a very specific way. Not dramatic. Precise. Like seeing a crack run through glass you had been pretending was fine. Mara, I said, where are you? Home. Ruby's asleep. Grant is downstairs. Can you leave? Not without making it obvious. Do you feel unsafe? She did not answer fast enough. That was answer enough. Then she whispered, he played another clip today. Mom telling me not to let you hide behind the past. But it sounded wrong. How? She called me sweetheart twice. Mom almost never did that unless I was sick or in trouble. Grant thinks she said it all the time because he read her letters to Ruby. That was good. Painful, but good. Real memory was pushing back. Listen to me, I said. Do not confront him alone. Do not mention Ruby's recordings. Do not mention the dollhouse. Monday is the place. What happens Monday? I wanted to tell her everything. I did not. Not because I distrusted her. Because fear leaks. Monday, we let Grant believe he is getting what he wants. Mara breathed shakily. And is he? No. For the first time in weeks, I heard something like my daughter in her voice. Good. On Sunday morning, Harriet found the audio vendor. His name was Milo Crane. 32 years old. Freelance sound designer. Worked from a converted garage behind a duplex in New Haven. He had done podcast cleanup, audiobook repairs, commercial voice edits, and, according to one archived page, legacy audio preservation. Legacy again. The word had become a bruise. We drove there without calling. Milo answered the door wearing sweatpants, an old orchestra t-shirt, and the expression of a man who knows exactly which mistake has finally knocked. When Harriet said Grant Ellison's name, he tried to close the door. I put my foot in it. At 72, you learn that certain old man stereotypes can be useful. People do not expect you to move quickly. I am not here to hurt you, I said. Then move your foot. I am here because someone used my dead wife's voice to manipulate my daughter. Milo went still. Behind him, a small studio glowed with monitors and sound foam. He looked at Harriet. Then me. Then my foot. Come in, he said. The room smelled like coffee, dust, and overheated equipment. Milo paced while we sat. At first he claimed he had only cleaned archival audio. Harriet let him lie for 3 minutes. Then she placed Ruby's video still on the table. Grant at the laptop. Eleanor's papers. The interface. Milo stopped pacing. I told him not to use it for decisions, he said. There is a kind of confession that begins as self-defense. Harriet opened her notebook. Use what? He rubbed his face. A reconstructed voice model. He said it was for a memorial installation. Interactive remembrance. Donor exhibit. Visitors could hear Eleanor welcome them. And the lines about signing property? I did not write those. But you generated them. He looked sick. Some. Not all. He kept asking for revisions. More warmth. More authority. Less breath noise. He wanted it to sound older, like a private note. I leaned forward. Did you know Eleanor was dead? Yes. Did you know my daughter believed the recordings were real? No answer. Milo. He sat down. I suspected. Harriet's pen scratched across paper. Do you still have files? He looked toward a hard drive tower. Backups. I keep everything because clients lie about revision history. Smart habit, Harriet said. Possibly the first one in this room. Milo gave us raw files, project folders, emails from Grant, payment records, and one message that changed everything. Grant had written. Need Eleanor to sound less like public speech and more like private pressure. Mara responds better when it feels maternal. Walter must believe resistance equals betrayal of her memory. There are lines you read once and never stop reading. Walter must believe resistance equals betrayal. Not grief. Strategy. Not misunderstanding. Weapon design. Milo agreed to testify if subpoenaed. He also gave us one more thing. A deleted draft folder. Inside were test lines Grant had rejected. Eleanor's voice saying, "Mara, if your father refuses, you may need to protect him from himself." Eleanor's voice saying, "Sometimes love means taking control before it is too late." Eleanor's voice saying, "Ruby will understand one day." I had to leave the room after that. I stood outside beside a trash bin behind the duplex and tried not to vomit. It is one thing to know someone forged documents. It is another thing to hear your wife's voice shaped into a leash for your daughter and granddaughter. When I went back inside, Harriet had already copied the files and made Milo sign a written statement. She handed me the drive. "Now we have the ghost maker." "Do not call him that." "Fine." Audio coward. That was Harriet's version of mercy. By Sunday night, the trap was no longer an idea. It was a schedule. Monday foundation meeting. Windmere House. Donors invited. Town board members. Grant's attorneys. Mara. Ruby kept away until the last moment. Harriet positioned 3 former Ledger staffers as guests with cameras. Deputy Nolan waited off property because official entry required cause. A lawyer named Patrice Venn prepared emergency injunction filings. Milo's files were backed up in 6 places. Eleanor's handwritten note was sealed in a clear folder. And I had one job. Let Grant talk himself into believing victory had made him safe. That night I did not sleep. I sat in Eleanor's chair and listened to the real recordings I still had. Her piano lessons. Old school concert introductions. A voicemail telling me to buy lemons and not the sad ones. Her breath was everywhere. Machines can copy pitch. They can copy rhythm. They can copy warmth if you feed them enough stolen life. But they do not remember why a person pauses before one name and not another. They do not know what a hospital room did to a marriage. They do not know why Eleanor laughed before criticizing someone. They do not know that she hummed when she was angry because she did not trust herself to speak yet. Grief knew those things. Ruby knew one of them. That was enough. Monday arrived bright and cruel. The kind of spring day that makes betrayal look better in photographs. Windmere's lawn was filled with folding chairs. A small stage had been set near the porch. Grant had hired a photographer. That still amazes me. He wanted images of the surrender. Me at the table. Mara beside me. The blue packet. Eleanor's portrait. Proof for donors that the old man had blessed the theft. The room of witnesses was his shield. He did not understand it could become mine. Mara arrived with Grant at 2. She looked pale but steady. Ruby was not with them. Grant greeted me with both hands, warm grip, gentle pressure. "Today matters," he said. "It does. I know this is hard. You have no idea." He mistook that for emotion. "Good." The meeting began at 3. Grant spoke first. Of course he did. He thanked everyone for honoring Eleanor. He spoke about continuity, healing, residence, stewardship, and courage. He said Windmere would serve widows, educators, caregivers, and leaders in need of renewal. He made a private retreat sound like a church. Then he invited Mara to speak. That had not been in the schedule he sent me. I went still. Mara stepped to the microphone. For a moment, she looked at the crowd. Then at me. Then at Eleanor's portrait. Grant watched her with polite expectation. My daughter took a breath. "My mother believed houses remember what happens inside them," she said. Her voice shook once, then steadied. I have been listening to what I thought was her guidance. I have also been remembering who she actually was. Those are not always the same thing. Grant's head turned slightly. The crowd shifted. Mara continued before he could stop her. I am here today to honor her. Not a version of her that makes decisions easier. Her. Then she stepped away from the microphone. It was not a confession. Not an accusation. But it was enough to disturb the room. Grant recovered quickly. He always did. Beautiful, he said, touching her shoulder. And exactly why today matters. He gestured toward the signing table. Walter, when you are ready. I walked slowly. Not because I needed to. Because old men walking slowly make impatient men reveal themselves. The blue packet lay on the table. 2 pens beside it. A notary named Celine Parks stood nearby. Dr. Philip Rask sat in the front row, holding a folder. He had never met me, but he smiled with the relaxed confidence of a man prepared to describe my mental state. I sat. Grant sat to my right. Mara to my left. The photographer lifted his camera. Harriet stood near the back with her phone angled casually. 3 other phones were recording. A small live stream had already begun under the title Eleanor Hale Foundation Update. Grant did not know that yet. He opened the packet to the first signature page. This is simply acknowledgement of intent. Read it aloud, I said. His smile paused. Walter, everyone has copies. Then reading will not hurt them. A few people laughed lightly. Grant had to choose between looking transparent and looking rushed. He chose transparent. He read. The first page sounded harmless. Acknowledgement. Transition. Alignment. Then came a clause granting Ellison Renewal Group authority to coordinate operational conversion and donor communications upon family approval. Pause, I said. Grant did. What does operational conversion mean? Administrative preparation. Does it include property control? Not without additional execution. Execution, I said. There is that word again. He laughed softly for the crowd. Legal terminology can sound harsh. So can theft, but at least theft is plain. The lawn went quiet. Grant's smile thinned. Mara looked at me sharply. Celine the notary shifted her weight. Dr. Rask closed his folder halfway. Grant leaned closer, voice low. Walter, this is not the moment. The microphone on the table picked him up anyway. Harriet's eyes flicked to me. Good. No, I said. This is exactly the moment. Grant's voice stayed pleasant. I understand grief can make public processing difficult. There. Publicly framed. Grief. Processing. Difficult. A softer version of unreliable. I looked at the audience. Before I sign anything, I want to hear Eleanor's guidance again. Grant froze. Only for a second. But enough. That feels private, he said. You announced my private decision in front of 200 people on Friday. A murmur moved through the chairs. Grant looked toward Mara. She did not help him. I reached beneath the table and pressed the remote Harriet had given me. The projector screen behind the stage lit up. Grant had arranged it for his presentation. We used it for mine. Eleanor's photograph appeared first. Not the dinner photo. One from our kitchen, flower on her cheek, laughing at something outside the frame. Then the first fake audio played. Eleanor's copied voice telling Mara to trust Grant. People softened at first. That was the cruelty of it. Even a fake ghost can make a room hold its breath. Then I played the real voicemail. Eleanor telling me to buy lemons. Small. Ordinary. Alive. Then I played them again, side by side. The fake voice. The real voice. Ruby's line appeared on the screen. Not Grandma's breath. I did not use Ruby's voice. I would not turn the child into evidence unless necessary. But her sentence was there. Then came Milo Crane's project files. Waveforms. Email timestamps. Grant's message. Need Eleanor to sound less like public speech and more like private pressure. Mara responds better when it feels maternal. Walter must believe resistance equals betrayal of her memory. The audience changed. You could hear it. Not a gasp. A collective reclassification of the man sitting beside me. Grant stood. This is wildly inappropriate. His voice was too loud. The microphone loved it. I stayed seated. Is the email yours? You are humiliating your daughter. Is the email yours? This is manipulated. Mara stood now too. Grant, she said. Answer him. He turned to her. Mara, sit down. That was the wrong tone. Everyone heard it. My daughter did not sit. I pressed the remote again. The next slide showed Eleanor's handwritten note. No private residence. No sale. No exceptions. Then the founding documents for the Eleanor Hale Center for Renewal and Residence, created 3 weeks before I had been told about any transfer. Then property marketing language from a private investor deck Harriet had found through a careless file name Grant's assistant had reused. Windmere Renewal Residences. 8 luxury suites. Marsh View Event Lawn. Membership-based retreat access. Projected annual revenue. $1.8 million. The donors saw the numbers before Grant could explain them away. Numbers are merciless when placed beside grief. Celine the notary tried to leave. Deputy Nolan stepped into her path at the edge of the lawn. Not dramatically. Just enough. Dr. Rask stood too. Harriet, from the back, called out, "Doctor, stay for your slide." I nearly smiled. The next slide showed his draft capacity letter. My name. Observed confusion. Date recall inconsistency. Temporary trustee transition. Under basis for opinion, the draft listed family reports, behavioral observations, delayed grief response, and inconsistent estate intent. No examination date. No meeting. No clinical interview. I turned toward him. "Dr. Rask, have we ever met?" He said nothing. The crowd turned. "Doctor," Harriet called, "the microphone is shy, not dead." He swallowed. "No. One word. Enough." Grant said, "This has become defamatory." That was when Mara picked up the blue packet. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. "You told me my mother wanted this." Grant's face changed. It was the smallest change. But I had spent a lifetime watching people answer questions they did not want printed. He was calculating which version of the lies still had legs. "She wanted impact," he said. "You made her say things." I preserved her voice. "You made my dead mother pressure me." The sentence landed harder from her than from me. Grant stepped toward her. "Mara, listen to yourself. You are upset because your father staged this." "No," she said. "I am upset because my daughter heard my mother's voice coming from your computer." Grant went still. He knew then. Ruby. His eyes flashed toward the house. I stood between that look and the porch before I knew I had moved. Do not even think her name. The lawn was silent now. Not polite silent. Witness silent. Grant's attorneys began whispering. One of them had the pale look of a man realizing he had been handed a snake and called it a ribbon. I pressed the remote again. More slides. Judith Markham. Arthur Bell. The church camp. The New Jersey Music School. Each case with the same phrases. Legacy transition. Continuity review. Donor intent alignment. Administrative partner authority. Past relatives complaints. Past property conversions. The room understood before the final slide. Grant had not come to help our family. He had come with a system. That was the difference between a bad man and a practiced predator. A bad man steals what is near. A practiced predator builds a method and waits for grief to open doors. Grant tried one last time to reclaim the story. He stepped to the microphone, raised both hands, and said, "I will not participate in a public execution built on stolen files, emotional distortions, and a grieving father's refusal to accept necessary change." I let him finish. Then I said, "Grant, your microphone is still on." He looked down. It was. It had been the whole time. And the live stream count on Harriet's phone had passed 18,000. Not huge by the standards of the world. Huge for a small town foundation meeting on a Monday afternoon. Huge enough that the town could not pretend it had not seen. Huge enough that 3 local reporters were already in the comments asking for contact. Grant turned toward the attorneys. One had stepped away from him. That was the moment his power began leaving through other people's body language. Then Ruby arrived. Not planned. Not by me. A car pulled into the drive and her friend's mother, pale and furious, stepped out with Ruby beside her. She said she needed to be here, the woman called. And after what she told me, I agreed. Ruby walked across the lawn holding something against her chest. A small portable recorder. Mara moved toward her, but Ruby shook her head. Wait, Mom. No child should ever have to say that to a parent. But she did. She stood beside me and pressed play. Grant's voice came from the recorder. Low. Angry. From some night in the study. Your grandfather is old. Your mother is emotional. People like that need guidance. If you keep sneaking around, Ruby, you will be the reason this house gets taken away from everyone. Do you understand me? Ruby's small voice answered, Grandma would not want you to scare us. Grant said, Grandma is not here. I am. The recording stopped. The entire lawn seemed to inhale and not exhale. Mara crossed the space to Ruby then. Not fast. Not dramatic. Like someone approaching a frightened animal she loved more than her own body. Ruby let her kneel and hold her. Grant looked around and finally understood the fatal shape of his mistake. He had prepared adults. Lawyers. Doctors. Donors. Documents. He had prepared for old grief and middle-aged guilt. He had not prepared for a child who knew the sound of her grandmother's breath. Sirens came next. Not movie sirens. No dramatic arrival. 2 cruisers and an unmarked state vehicle pulling onto gravel while people turned and parted. Deputy Nolan spoke quietly with the officers. Patrice Venn, the lawyer, handed over the emergency packet. Harriet handed over copies. Milo Crane's statement. Rask's draft. The forged audio project files. The blue packet. The trust documents. The investor deck. Ruby's recording. Eleanor's note. Grant tried to leave then. Of course he did. Not running. Men like him rarely run at first. They begin with purposeful walking, as if everyone else has misunderstood their schedule. A state investigator stopped him near the driveway. Mr. Ellison, we need you to remain available. Grant said, I am calling my attorney. The investigator said, that is a good idea. That was one of the most satisfying sentences I had ever heard. Dr. Rask was asked to stay. So was Celine Parks. Grant's 2 attorneys suddenly became very clear that they represented the firm in limited document review, not necessarily Grant personally. That is another lesson. When a fraud begins collapsing, professional loyalty develops narrow definitions very quickly. By sunset, Windmere's lawn looked like the aftermath of a storm that had chosen paper instead of rain. Chairs crooked. Packets open. People standing in clusters. Mara sitting on the porch steps with Ruby pressed against her side. Harriet talking to a reporter with the calm brutality of a woman who had waited years for a good front page. And Eleanor's photograph still on the small table near the stage. I walked over to it. For the first time all day, I let myself stop performing. I am sorry, I said quietly. Not because Eleanor had been fooled. She had not. Because I almost had been. Because I almost let politeness sign what vigilance could have stopped. Mara came up beside me. For a while neither of us spoke. Then she said, I believed it because I wanted to hear her again. That was the cleanest confession either of us made that day. I took her hand. So did I. I am sorry, Dad. Me too. For what? For making you grieve without me while I called it giving you space. She leaned against my shoulder then, just slightly. Ruby joined us and slid her hand into mine. Grandpa? Yes. Can we take the bell off the dollhouse? There is no bell on the dollhouse. I mean the little attic lock. I hate secrets now. That almost broke me. Children should have secret places for treasure, not evidence. Yes, I said. We can take it off. The legal fight did not end that day. That is important. Stories make exposure feel like a finish line. Real life makes it a doorway into paperwork. Grant was not dragged away in dramatic handcuffs that afternoon. He was questioned. Then released. Then subpoenaed. Then indicted months later after the state attorney general's office and federal investigators connected our case to 3 others. Dr. Rask lost his license before Grant's first hearing. Celine Parks cooperated after her own attorney explained that notary fraud becomes less charming when attached to elder exploitation. Milo Crane testified under immunity for limited involvement and spent most of the hearing looking like a man who finally understood that saying yes to a bad client can echo louder than expected. Grant's firm collapsed first financially, then legally. The investor deck became evidence. The forged audio became evidence. The prior cases became evidence. The phrase "Walter must believe resistance equals betrayal" appeared on screen in a courtroom 6 months later. I watched the jury read it. Some sentences do not need a prosecutor's help. Mara testified. So did I. Ruby did not. That was one victory I insisted on. Her recording was admitted through chain of custody and adult witnesses. The child had already done enough. Grant took a plea after the Rhode Island and Vermont cases were added. Not because he became remorseful. Because men like him understand odds when power stops flattering them. He admitted to wire fraud, elder exploitation conspiracy, forged capacity documentation, and fraudulent nonprofit filings. He did not admit to spiritual cruelty. There is no statute for turning a dead woman's voice against her family. There should be. His sentence was 11 years. Not enough for Mara. Not enough for Harriet. Not enough for me on bad nights. But enough to give the word consequence a place to stand. Restitution came slowly. Some properties could not be restored. Judith Markham's cottage remained tied in litigation. Arthur Bell's farmhouse had already been renovated beyond recognition. But their families heard from us. That mattered. Not because we fixed everything. Because sometimes the first mercy is telling people they were not crazy. They had seen something wrong. They had been dismissed. Now the dismissal had a name. Windmere House stayed with us. More accurately, it left us in the way Eleanor wanted. We created the Eleanor Hale Music House Trust with 3 independent trustees, no private residence rights, no retreat conversion language, no administrative partner authority, and a clause Harriet insisted on calling the no fancy nonsense provision. The actual lawyers gave it a more boring name. We still call it Harriet's Clause. The first summer program opened 10 months after the dinner. 8 young teachers stayed at Windmere. 14 children took lessons. The piano in the sunroom was tuned for the first time in years. On the first day, Ruby sat on the porch steps listening to a boy practice scales so badly that even the marsh birds seemed offended. She smiled. Not fully. But enough. Mara started therapy. So did Ruby. So did I, though Harriet says I mostly attend so a professional can witness me pretending not to need it. Maybe she is right. Healing is not clean. People love that word because it sounds gentle. But healing is often ugly, repetitive work. It is realizing you flinch at a voice message. It is watching your daughter cry because she misses her mother and hates that the missing became a doorway for abuse. It is your granddaughter asking if recordings can lie and then asking if photographs can lie and then asking if memories can lie. You do not answer a question like that once. You answer it over months. With patience. With truth. With no more blue packets left unopened. One afternoon, about a year after everything, Mara and I found the dollhouse attic key in Ruby's desk drawer. Ruby had left it there on purpose. Beside it was a note. I don't need this hiding place anymore. Mara cried. I did not, mostly because I had already cried in the garage that morning over a box of Eleanor's sheet music, and a man has to schedule these things if he wants to remain hydrated. We removed the attic lock from the dollhouse together. Ruby painted the little attic door yellow, not blue. When I asked why, she said, yellow is for things that are seen. That child will either become a judge, a journalist, or someone impossible to lie to at family dinners. God help the world if she becomes all 3. I still think about the night of the scholarship dinner. The applause. Grant's hand on Mara's back. The blue place card. Ruby under the table. My wife's stolen voice filling my kitchen. There is a temptation, after something like this, to say I trusted my gut and saved everyone. That would be too flattering. The truth is smaller and more useful. I ignored my gut for months. I softened it. Explained it away. Called it grief, jealousy, old age, protectiveness. The person who truly listened first was Ruby. A child heard what the adults did not. Not because she understood fraud. Because she remembered love accurately. She remembered that Eleanor breathed before Mara's name. That one detail opened everything. So if there is a lesson in this story, it is not simply trust your instincts. It is protect your memories from people who want to edit them. Ask who benefits when a dead person's wishes suddenly become convenient. Read every document that arrives wrapped in urgency. Be careful of people who speak beautifully about legacy while refusing plain questions about ownership. And never let politeness silence a child who is trying to tell you something is wrong. Evil does not always arrive shouting. Sometimes it arrives with a blue packet, a memorial speech, and a voice that almost sounds like someone you loved. Almost is where truth survives. That is where Ruby found it. That is where we found our way back. And that is why, every year at the first summer concert at Windmere, before the children sing badly and beautifully, before Mara welcomes the teachers, before Harriet complains about the folding chairs, I stand near Eleanor's photograph and listen for the breath. Not the copied voice. Not the polished message. The real one. The pause before love speaks. Because now I know, if you listen closely enough, truth still has a sound. And no thief, no matter how clever, can fully fake the breath of someone who loved you. The first week after Grant's public collapse was stranger than the collapse itself. People imagine that after a predator is exposed, the air becomes clean immediately. It does not. The air becomes full of questions. Who knew? Who suspected? Who signed? Who looked away? Who benefited? Who wants to pretend they never clapped? Briar Glen became a town of careful faces. The same donors who had applauded Grant's announcement began sending messages about how something had seemed off to them from the beginning. That is one of the most dependable instincts in respectable communities. After truth becomes safe, everyone remembers being brave earlier. Harriet wanted to print every message under a headline reading "Local Courage Discovered Retroactively." I told her the trust needed donors more than it needed her satisfying cruelty. She said those two things should not be mutually exclusive. Mara did not leave the house for 3 days. Not because Grant came back. He did not. Because shame has its own weather. She replayed every conversation, every recording, every moment she had told me I was being difficult. I could see her punishing herself with perfect detail. On the 4th morning I found her in the sunroom, sitting beside the piano bench with Eleanor's notebook spread around her. She had sorted the sliced pages, the intact pages, the photocopied pages, and the donor notes Grant had scanned. She was making an index. Grief had become clerical. That is not always a bad thing. Sometimes order is how a person puts their hands around chaos without choking on it. She looked up when I came in. He knew which words would hurt me because I gave them to him, she said. No. Dad. You gave your husband access to family memories. That is not the same as giving a thief permission to weaponize them. She shook her head. I should have known. Maybe. That made her look at me. Most people say no too fast when someone they love admits a painful truth. I had learned not to do that. Maybe you should have noticed some things, I said. Maybe I should have noticed more. Maybe we both let missing your mother make us hungry for anyone who seemed certain. That is different from being guilty of what he did. Mara turned the page of one notebook carefully. Ruby noticed. Ruby was watching from underneath the adult story. Sometimes that is a clearer view. She smiled for half a second. Then her face crumpled. He scared her. In my house. While I was upstairs believing I was protecting Mom's legacy. There was no sentence that could repair that. So I sat beside her. We stayed there until Ruby came in wearing pajamas and carrying cereal in a mug because she had decided bowls were unnecessary technology. She looked at us. Are we sad again? Mara wiped her face. A little. Ruby nodded like a doctor confirming expected symptoms. Okay. But not the scary sad. No, Mara said. Not the scary sad. That became part of our language afterward. There is sad. There is scary sad. There is the kind of sad where people still answer questions. And there is the kind where children start hiding keys. We promised her, all of us, that no feeling in our house would ever again require her to become the evidence keeper. Promises made after harm are easy to say. Harder to keep. We tried. Grant's defense started before the formal charges. His attorney released a statement calling the events at Windermere an emotionally charged misunderstanding involving experimental memorial technology, complicated family grief, and premature assumptions about estate planning. Harriet read the statement aloud in my kitchen and said, "If language could wear cologne, this would smell expensive and guilty." The statement hurt Mara more than she admitted. Not because it was convincing. Because it used the same fog Grant had used privately. Grief. Complexity. Misunderstanding. Experimental. All true enough to soften the lie if you were not paying attention. So Harriet and I prepared a public response. Not emotional. Not long. Just facts. The audio was generated from stolen writings and recordings. The property transfer was prepared before family consent. The capacity letter was drafted by a physician who had never met me. Investor materials contradicted the stated charitable purpose. Prior cases showed similar patterns. The matter was under investigation. Windermere would remain protected. No insults. No dramatic adjectives. Harriet hated that. She said adjectives were invented for men like Grant. But facts travel farther when they are not dragging fireworks behind them. The first Pryor family to call was Judith Markham's nephew. His name was Paul. He was a school bus mechanic in Rhode Island. He had tried to challenge the cottage transfer and had been treated like a greedy relative angry about losing inheritance. That is another common trick. When people challenge suspicious generosity, predators frame them as selfish. Paul cried on the phone when I told him Grant's files mentioned Judith. Not loud. Just a man suddenly allowed to stop defending his own memory. She told me she never wanted strangers sleeping in that cottage, he said. Everyone said I was making it about money. I just wanted them to stop saying she changed into someone else at the end. Changed into someone else. That phrase stayed with me. It named the deeper theft. Grant did not only take property. He edited people at the end of their lives. He made families believe their loved ones had revised themselves into convenience. Arthur Bell's daughter called next. Then a former church secretary from the Camp case. Then a music teacher in New Jersey. Each story had its own details, but the spine was familiar. A grieving family. A valuable property. A promise to serve others. A consultant who arrived with better language. A professional who raised concerns about capacity or continuity. A document package. A relative made to look difficult. A final transfer nobody could undo without money they did not have. The pattern mattered. In isolation, each family had looked emotional. Together, they looked targeted. That is why predators love isolation. One person sounds bitter. 5 people sound like evidence. Mara began calling them with me. At first she mostly listened. Then she started asking better questions than I did. What exact phrase did he use? Did he mention legacy or renewal? Was there a doctor? Did anyone produce a private message from the original owner? Was there urgency around filing dates? Did they make you feel selfish for asking for time? Every call helped her move shame into function. Not erase it. Function. There is a difference. Ruby helped in smaller ways. She made a sign for the kitchen wall that said, "Questions are allowed." The letters were crooked. The message was not. For weeks, anyone who said, "Can I ask something?" would point to the sign first. It sounds silly. It was not. A family that has been manipulated needs new rules written where everyone can see them. One rule was no secret recordings by children. Ruby protested because, in her words, mine worked. She was not wrong. But Mara told her, "Your job is to be a kid. Our job is to believe you before you need proof." That sentence became another law in the house. Believe before proof when a child says something feels wrong. Not convict. Not panic. Believe enough to look. That would have changed everything sooner. 2 months after the Windermere meeting, Grant tried to contact Mara through a letter. The prosecutor's office warned us before it arrived. Mara chose to read it with me and her therapist present. It was 4 pages long. No apology. Not one. It spoke of emotional contagion, family pressure, public humiliation, unfair interpretation, technological misunderstanding, and his deep concern that Ruby had been manipulated against him. When Mara finished, she folded it once and said, "He still thinks language is a room he can lock us in." That was the clearest thing she had said since the dinner. We burned a copy in the fireplace that night. Not the legal original. Harriet would have tackled us if we destroyed evidence. A copy. Ruby watched the paper curl and asked if burning lies made them gone. I told her no. Then why do it? Mara answered before I could. Because sometimes your body needs to see that paper is not stronger than you. Ruby accepted that. So did I. The trial process taught me that justice is not a lightning strike. It is weathering. Slow. Grinding. Full of delays that feel insulting because life already waited too long. Grant's attorneys tried to suppress the live stream. They argued privacy. They argued emotional coercion. They argued that the public meeting had created theatrical pressure. The judge asked whether Grant had voluntarily attended the meeting, voluntarily spoken, voluntarily presented documents, and voluntarily described the process as public donor reassurance. That was a good day. Dr. Rask's lawyer tried to separate him from the larger scheme. He claimed the capacity letter was only a preliminary template. Then Harriet's records showed he had billed Ellison Renewal Group for Walter Hale continuity assessment preparation 2 weeks before the dinner. Preparation for an assessment of a person he had not met. That was a better day. Celine Parks gave investigators the notary log. She had notarized blank signature pages before meetings in 2 prior cases. She called it efficiency. The prosecutor called it fraud. I admired the prosecutor's vocabulary. Milo Crane's testimony was the strangest. He sat under fluorescent courtroom lights and explained voice models to a jury that included 3 retirees, 1 electrician, a school cafeteria manager, and a man who kept squinting at the screen like technology had personally betrayed him. Milo explained source material, generation, editing, breath removal, and emotional tone shaping. Then the prosecutor played the fake Eleanor recording. I thought I was prepared. I was not. Mara reached for my hand. Ruby was not in the courtroom. Thank God. Then the prosecutor played Eleanor's real voicemail about lemons. A juror cried. Not because the lemon voicemail proved a technical point. Because ordinary truth has a way of embarrassing polished lies. At sentencing, Mara made a statement. She did not yell. She did not call Grant a monster. She said, "You understood that grief is not only sadness. It is hunger. You fed that hunger with my mother's stolen voice. You made me afraid that doubting you meant betraying her. That was the deepest theft. The property was only what you planned to take after." Grant looked at the table while she spoke. Maybe shame. Maybe strategy. I no longer waste energy trying to identify sincerity in men who profit from its imitation. When it was my turn, I brought Eleanor's note. The original stayed in evidence. I held a copy. I read it aloud. No private residence. No sale. No exceptions. Then I said, my wife wrote in plain language because she trusted us to be brave enough to obey it. I was almost not brave enough. My daughter was almost not protected enough. My granddaughter had to become braver than any child should be. That is what your fraud did before it touched $1. I had planned to say more. I did not need to. Sometimes stopping is the strongest edit. After Grant was sentenced, reporters asked if I felt closure. Closure is one of those words people use when they want pain to become polite. I told them I felt consequence. That was enough for the article. In private, I felt tired. Deeply, honestly tired. The kind of tired that comes after holding a door shut for months and then realizing the door is open but your body has not gotten the message. Windmere helped. Not as a symbol. As a place. Places matter. The first time music returned to the sunroom, Mara stood in the hallway and cried without hiding. Ruby sat beside a younger child and showed her middle C. Harriet complained that the cookies were dry. I told her Eleanor's cookies were often dry. She said death had made me sentimental and inaccurate. It was good to hear someone insult dessert again. The house did not become pure happiness. No real house does. It became usable truth. Children played. Teachers argued about lesson plans. Mara rebuilt donor trust one uncomfortable conversation at a time. I wrote monthly updates for the foundation because old newspapermen do not retire, they just lose deadlines and become annoying voluntarily. Every update began with one plain paragraph about ownership, money, and decisions. No fog. No legacy language unless absolutely necessary. No renewal unless someone was actually repairing a roof. We made the finances public. We made minutes public. We made conflicts public. Sunlight is not poetic when you are doing spreadsheets. It is still useful. A year later, Paul from Rhode Island visited Windmere. He stood on the porch looking at the marsh and said Judith would have liked it. Arthur Bell's daughter came too. She brought a framed photograph of the farmhouse before it was changed. We hung copies of their stories in the hallway, not as decoration, but as warning. Grant had tried to isolate each family inside private shame. We gave the stories neighbors. That was part of the revenge too. People hear revenge and imagine shouting, ruin, a public collapse. We had that. But the better revenge came later. Every child who learned piano in that house was revenge. Every public financial report was revenge. Every family who heard, you were right to question it, was revenge. Every time Mara laughed without looking over her shoulder, revenge. Every time Ruby asked a direct question and an adult answered it plainly, revenge. Grant wanted our grief to become a private asset. We made it public shelter. That is the kind of ending he could not understand. He thought winning meant holding the deed. Eleanor thought winning meant hearing children make noise in rooms rich people wanted quiet. Eleanor was right. She usually was. On the second anniversary of her death, we held a small concert at Windmere. Nothing grand. No donors in suits. No salmon. No legacy speeches that sounded like furniture polish. Just folding chairs, lemonade, sheet music, and a dozen children trying very hard to stand still. Ruby played first. She made 2 mistakes and kept going. That mattered more than perfection. Mara turned pages for her. I sat in the front row with Harriet beside me. Halfway through, a breeze moved through the open windows and lifted the corner of Eleanor's photograph on the piano. For a ridiculous second, I wanted to believe she had done it. Then I remembered the lesson. Do not need ghosts to approve what the living already know. But I did hear something. Not a voice. Not a message. A breath from the room itself. Children shifting. A teacher whispering count again. Mara laughing softly when Ruby frowned at the keyboard. The marsh outside. The house full of noise. The real kind. The kind no machine can generate from stolen letters. After the concert, Ruby handed me a blue place card. For one terrible second, my body remembered the first one. Then I saw what she had written. Questions are allowed. She had drawn a tiny piano beneath it. I keep that card in my desk now, beside Eleanor's note. 2 documents. One from a woman who knew how to make a promise clear. One from a child who knew how to make a family honest again. That is what survived Grant Ellison. Not the scandal. Not the headlines. Not even the conviction. The clarity. The refusal to let grief be translated by someone who profited from confusion. So when people ask me how we got revenge, I tell them the truth. We let him build a stage. We let him invite witnesses. We let him place the blue packet in front of me and believe age had made me manageable. Then we used his own stage to play the voice he stole, show the words he wrote, reveal the papers he prepared, and let every person he hoped to impress see exactly what kind of man had been speaking in my wife's name. That was the public revenge. The private revenge is better. Windmere still stands. Mara is safe. Ruby sleeps without hiding evidence in dollhouses. Children play music in the sunroom. And Eleanor's name belongs to Eleanor again. That is enough. More than enough. But there is another part of the revenge that people rarely ask about because it does not look as cinematic as a public exposure. It did not happen on the lawn. It did not happen under cameras. It happened in rooms with bad coffee, in courthouse hallways, in bank conference rooms, and at my kitchen table after midnight while Mara sat across from me learning how to trust her own memory again. Grant's public collapse was the beginning of consequences, not the end of them. The first thing he did after leaving Windmere was try to become the victim. That should not have surprised me. A man who can borrow a dead woman's voice will not hesitate to borrow a wound. His attorney sent a letter claiming I had staged an unlawful ambush, violated confidential planning materials, exploited a child's misunderstanding, and weaponized grief against a professional who had been trying to preserve Eleanor's mission. Professional. Preserve. Mission. There they were again. The perfume words. Words sprayed over rot. Harriet read the letter at my kitchen table and made a sound that was half laugh, half threat. He thinks the fight is still about interpretation, she said. Isn't it? No. Interpretation is what guilty men request when facts start behaving badly. Mara was sitting beside the window, her arms wrapped around herself. She had not spoken much that morning. Then she said, "He will say I was unstable." No one answered too quickly. That was important. Because she was right. Grant had spent months building two stories at once. One story made me look like a grieving old man sliding into confusion. The other made Mara look like a daughter so desperate to hear her mother that she could be led by emotion. He had built exits for himself inside our pain. If the transfer worked, he would call it stewardship. If the transfer failed, he would call it family instability. Predators rarely rely on one lie. They build a hallway of them. So we answered in the language he hated most. Dates. Receipts. Original files. Witnesses. No adjectives. No begging. No dramatic claim we could not support. Patrice then filed for an emergency freeze on all Windmere-related corporate activity by 4 that afternoon. By 5, Harriet had prepared a clean evidence index. By 6, Mara had written a sworn statement that did something stronger than defend herself. It admitted exactly where she had been vulnerable. I believed the recordings because they touched a grief I had not named. I relied on Grant's interpretation because I thought resisting him meant resisting my mother's final wishes. Once I heard the unedited files and saw the creation records, I understood that my grief had been targeted. Patrice read the statement and nodded. This is good. Mara looked embarrassed. It makes me sound weak. No, Patrice said. It makes you sound credible. Weak people do not describe how they were manipulated. Brave people do. That sentence helped Mara more than any comfort I had offered. Sometimes people need a lawyer to say what love has been trying to say for days. The first hearing happened the following Thursday. Not a trial. A temporary order. A small courtroom with beige walls, wooden benches, a humming vent, and a judge who looked like she had heard every kind of family lie and ranked most of them poorly. Grant came in wearing a dark suit, no wedding ring, and an expression of injured dignity. He sat 3 rows away from Mara and never looked directly at her. That was another performance. Men like Grant no distance can look respectful when contempt is what really holds them back. Dr. Rask came too. So did Celine Parks. Their attorneys sat close enough to Grant to look connected and far enough away to look careful. The judge began with property status. Patrice explained the foundation, the forged audio, the preliminary capacity review, the investor deck, and the risk of asset movement. Grant's attorney stood and said, "Your Honor, this is an emotionally loaded estate disagreement. Mr. Ellison's work was exploratory and based on family-provided material." The judge asked one question. Who formed the Eleanor Hale Center for Renewal and Residence? The attorney hesitated. Mr. Ellison's office assisted with formation. Before or after Mr. Hale consented? Silence. There are quiet moments in court that feel louder than shouting. Patrice slid the formation documents forward. 3 weeks before Mr. Hale was informed. The judge wrote something down. I will remember that pen movement longer than some speeches. Then came the capacity letter. Dr. Rask was called only for limited questioning. He tried to sound clinical. He said preliminary documentation can be prepared before examination when a family anticipates potential need. The judge looked over her glasses. Doctor, did you ever speak to Mr. Hale? No, Your Honor. Did you observe him? Not directly. Did you conduct testing? No. Yet you drafted language suggesting observed confusion and date recall inconsistency. Observed by whom? He glanced at Grant. Just once. That glance did more damage than a paragraph. Information was provided by family representatives, he said. Mara's face hardened. Grant had made himself family in paperwork before earning the word in truth. The judge granted the freeze. No transfers. No filings. No donor communications by Ellison Renewal Group. No use of Eleanor's name or likeness in any planning materials. And then she added something that made Harriet close her eyes like she had just heard music. All audio materials purporting to represent Eleanor Hale's wishes are to be preserved in native format with metadata intact. Native format. Metadata intact. Beautiful words, in the right room. Grant's attorney objected to the scope. The judge said, overruled. If the recordings are authentic, preservation should not concern your client. That was the second revenge. Not humiliation. Preservation. The thing he could not afford. Over the next month, the files told their own story. Milo's backups showed creation dates. Grant's emails showed revision requests. One folder was labeled EH maternal pressure set. Another was labeled Walter resistance variance. A third was labeled Mara late night soft version. When I first read those names, I had to stand up and leave the room. Not because I was surprised anymore. Because categories can be cruel in a way curses cannot. He had not simply made fake recordings. He had organized our grief into usable moods. Maternal pressure. Resistance. Late night soft. He understood timing. He knew Mara listened differently after 9 at night when Ruby was asleep and the house was quiet. He knew I became defensive when people called me stubborn. He knew Eleanor's voice could make both of us feel judged by love. That was the third revenge. Naming the method. Once you name a method, it loses some of its magic. Mara printed the folder names and taped them to a board. At first I thought it was unhealthy. Then she told me why. I need to see that it was constructed, she said. When it stays vague, I keep wondering if part of it was real. When I see the folders, I remember someone built it. So we left the board up. Not in Ruby's view. In Mara's office. Every time Doubt came back wearing her mother's face, she looked at the folder names and said, constructed. That became another family word. Constructed. A word you can place between your mind and the lie that wants back in. Grant's investors turned next. That part was satisfying in a colder way. People who believed they were buying into a quiet luxury retreat do not enjoy discovering their projected revenue came from a property they did not own, tied to a foundation they could not control, named after a woman whose family was now publicly furious. One investor called me directly. He began by saying he had been misled. I said, that makes several of us. He did not like that. He explained that he had only seen preliminary concepts. I asked if those concepts included 8 luxury suites and Marsh View membership access. He said the language was flexible. I said, so is a rope until someone uses it around your neck. Harriet told me later that line was too much. I told her age had earned me occasional excess. The investor eventually cooperated. Not out of morality. Out of distance. He wanted his name as far from Grant as possible. That is useful too. Justice does not require every witness to become noble. Sometimes fear of embarrassment opens the same file cabinet. The investor emails proved Grant had described Mara as emotionally aligned and me as sentimental but manageable. Manageable. I had been called many things in 72 years. Manageable was new. Harriet laughed for almost a full minute when she read it. He really did not know you, she said. He knew the grieving version. Then grief needs better public relations. While the legal case grew, the private repair moved slower. Ruby had nightmares about voices. Not ghosts. Voices. In one dream, every adult in the house spoke with Grandma's voice and none of them had faces. Mara told me that with the flat voice parents use when fear is too big to perform. We found a therapist who specialized in children and coercive family systems. Ruby did not like her at first because the woman had too many smooth stones in a bowl and Ruby said smooth stones were suspiciously calm. By the third visit, she liked her enough to ask whether bad people can use good memories like costumes. The therapist said yes. Ruby asked how to stop them. The therapist said, you keep the real memory with people who tell the truth. Ruby thought about that and then said, so memory needs witnesses. 10 years old. Memory needs witnesses. I wrote it down later because I am still a newspaperman and theft offends me even when the stolen thing is a sentence. That became the foundation's hidden purpose, even before we named it publicly. Not just music. Witness. Every scholarship, every open ledger, every meeting where Mara answered hard questions without flinching, every hallway display about prior families, all of it said the same thing. Your memory is allowed to have witnesses. Grant had tried to isolate memory inside private grief where he could edit it. We moved memory into rooms with chairs. That was the better architecture. 3 months after the exposure, Mara asked me to come with her to the storage unit Grant had rented under the foundation's future name. Investigators had already searched it. They released the non-evidence items back to us. I expected boxes. There were boxes. But there was also furniture. White wicker chairs. Rolled rugs. Sample linens. A sign mock-up that read Windmere Renewal Residences in tasteful gray lettering. Mara stood in front of it for a long time. Then she picked it up and turned it around. On the back, in marker, someone had written. Hail family angle good for launch story. Not Eleanor. Not music. Not children. Angle. Mara carried the sign outside herself. She placed it flat on the gravel. Then she looked at me. Can I? Yes. She stepped on it. Once. Then again. Then harder. The cheap board cracked on the fourth stomp. It was not dignified. It was necessary. When it broke, she laughed and cried at the same time. A storage worker pretended not to watch. I tipped him $20 for his discretion and another $10 for the use of a trash bin. That sign never became evidence. It became kindling. Not all revenge belongs in court. Some of it belongs under your shoe. The final surprise came from Eleanor herself. Not a ghost. A file. Harriet was digitizing old ledger archives for the foundation hallway when she found a transcript from an interview I had done with Eleanor 15 years earlier for a local art supplement. I had forgotten it completely. The headline was ordinary. Music teacher turns living rooms into classrooms. In the interview, I had asked Eleanor what she hoped would happen to Windmere one day. Her answer was right there in print, dated, archived, public. I want this house noisy after I am gone. If it ever serves a cause, let it serve children and teachers. If anyone puts private retreat language around it, Walter should haunt them on my behalf, because I will be busy correcting the angel's rhythm. Harriet read it aloud and said, I withdraw every complaint I ever made about your human interest pieces. One finally became useful. That article became part of the trust record. Not legally necessary after everything else. Emotionally necessary. Because it gave Eleanor her own voice back without technology, without reconstruction, without Grant's dirty hands between her and us. Ink on paper. Old archive. Plain words. That was the fourth revenge. Letting the real dead answer the fake dead. When Grant's plea hearing finally came, the courtroom was full. Not because our town loves justice more than drama. Because those two things sometimes share a parking lot. Paul from Rhode Island came. Arthur Bell's daughter came. The church secretary came with a folder thick enough to scare a defense attorney. Milo came and sat in the back, looking as if he wanted to disappear inside his own shirt. Ruby stayed home with Harriet's sister and made cookies that were somehow both raw and burned. Grant stood before the judge and admitted only what the plea required. He admitted the scheme. He admitted the false documents. He admitted unauthorized voice generation for the purpose of influencing property decisions. He admitted financial misrepresentation. He did not say Eleanor's name unless forced. That angered me at first. Then I was glad. He had used her name enough. At the end, the judge allowed victim statements. Paul spoke about Judith's cottage. Arthur's daughter spoke about the farmhouse. Mara spoke about grief as hunger. I spoke briefly. Then, with the judge's permission, Patrice read Eleanor's old interview answer into the record. If anyone puts private retreat language around it, Walter should haunt them on my behalf. A few people laughed. Even the judge's mouth moved slightly. Grant did not. Good. Let him sit in a room where Eleanor's real words got the last laugh. After sentencing, Mara and I walked out together. Reporters waited. Harriet, naturally, had positioned herself where the light was best despite claiming she hated cameras. A young reporter asked me what I wanted people to take away from the case. I could have said beware voice technology. I could have said protect elders. I could have said verify documents. All true. But what came out was simpler. Do not let anyone make love complicated when property is on the table. Love speaks plainly. Fraud needs vocabulary. That line ran in 3 papers. Harriet pretended to be annoyed she had not said it first. The months after sentencing were quieter. Not peaceful every day. Quiet. There is a difference. Peace is internal. Quiet is just the absence of sirens. Mara still had days when she doubted herself. Ruby still disliked closed study doors. I still sometimes heard the fake Eleanor recording in my mind at the worst moments, not because I believed it, but because violation does not politely leave when proof arrives. So we built routines. Sunday dinner at Windmere. Open calendar for foundation decisions. No major document signed without 2 outside reviewers. No family conversation about money after 9 at night. That last rule was Mara's. She said nothing good had entered our lives after 9 p.m. wearing emotional urgency. She was not wrong. We also made a new rule for recordings. If someone sends us a message from a person who cannot speak for themselves, we do not react first. We verify source. We check date. We ask who benefits. Then, and only then, we decide whether the message deserves a place in our hearts. That may sound cold. It is not. It is how we keep warmth from being stolen again. The first real summer at Windmere was imperfect. One teacher quit after 4 days because the marsh smell gave her headaches. 2 children fought over a metronome. A donor complained that the financial reports were too detailed and made the foundation feel less romantic. Harriet wrote back that romance was not an accounting category. Mara made me apologize for the tone but not the meaning. Ruby started giving unofficial tours of the house. She showed children the sunroom, the porch, the old music cabinet, and the dollhouse with the yellow attic door. When one girl asked why the attic door was yellow, Ruby said, because hidden things made trouble. Seen things behave better. I did not correct her. It was as good a theology as any. At the end of the summer, we held the first student concert. The youngest boy forgot his piece halfway through and announced to the audience that his fingers had lost the map. Eleanor would have adored him. Mara bent down, whispered something, and he started again. Wrong measure. Wrong rhythm. Perfect courage. That night, after everyone left, I found Ruby asleep on the porch swing with a program folded in her lap. Mara covered her with a blanket. We stood there listening to the marsh. Then Mara said, Mom got what she wanted. I looked through the window at the messy chairs, the lemonade cups, the sheet music scattered across the piano. Yes, I said. Noise. Mara smiled. Beautiful noise. That is where I like to end the story in my mind. Not with Grant in court. Not with the blue packet on the table. Not with the fake voice exposed. With a tired child asleep after music in a house that almost became a private retreat for people who never needed another retreat. Because revenge, the kind that lasts, is not only the collapse of the person who hurt you. It is the survival of what they tried to convert. Grant tried to convert memory into leverage. We turned it back into witness. He tried to convert grief into signatures. We turned it into policy. He tried to convert Windmere into silence for paying guests. We turned it into scales, wrong notes, questions, arguments, laughter, and children running down hallways with adults telling them to slow down and secretly loving that they did not. That is the ending Eleanor deserved. That is the ending Ruby helped save. And that is the ending Grant never had the imagination to fear. If you have stayed with me this long, carry this part with you. The most dangerous lies often arrive through the most tender places. A mother's voice. A family promise. A child's trust. A widow's wish. A father's fear of becoming difficult. Protect those places. Do not harden them into stone. Just guard the doors. Ask the plain question. Open the packet. Read the clause. Listen for the breath. And when someone tells you not to make a scene while they are quietly stealing the scene itself, make one anyway. Make it bright. Make it documented. Make it full of witnesses. Then let truth do what truth does best. Not shout. Stand. I thought that would be the last lesson. It was not. 6 months after Grant entered prison, a letter arrived at Windermere with no return address on the front, only my name written in a hand I recognized from too many signature pages. Mara wanted to throw it away. Harriet wanted to steam it open over a kettle and then pretend she had not. Patrice, being the only responsible adult in the room that day, told us to photograph the envelope, log the date, and read it together if we chose to read it at all. We chose. Not because Grant deserved another audience. Because secrets had already cost us too much. The letter was 3 pages. It began with the usual polished regret. Not apology. Regret. Regret is what careful people use when apology would require ownership. He wrote that prison had given him time to reflect. He wrote that he never meant to hurt Ruby. He wrote that Eleanor's voice had moved him too, that perhaps he had become carried away by the beauty of preserving memory. Harriet made a choking sound at that line. Mara kept reading. Then we reached the real purpose. Grant wanted access to certain archived materials so he could cooperate with investigators in other matters and clarify his role. Clarify. Another old friend. He listed 3 file names from the project folders Milo had created. Files we had never made public. That meant one of 2 things. Either Grant remembered more than he had admitted, or someone outside still had access to pieces of the system. The room changed immediately. Not fear exactly. Readiness. Trauma teaches the body to hear old footsteps in new halls. Patrice took the letter. Harriet pulled out her notebook. Mara called the investigator. And Ruby, who had been drawing at the far end of the table, looked up and said, "So the story still has a basement." We all turned toward her. She shrugged. In books, when the bad guy writes from jail, there is always a basement. She was not wrong. The basement turned out to be a storage server Grant had used through one of his previous firms. Not under his name. Not under Ellison Renewal Group. Under a dissolved vendor account tied to the New Jersey Music School case. Milo knew the platform. He had used it once for a transfer. Investigators found it because Grant, trying to bargain from prison, referenced file names that still existed in an old sync log. That was the last useful thing he ever gave us. The server contained drafts from other families. Not all completed. Some were only research. Some were voice samples waiting for enough source material. Some were property profiles with emotional notes attached. Widower, founder attached to dead brother's approval. Daughter conflict useful. Grandchild close to target, avoid contact. Avoid contact. Avoid contact. I stared at that phrase for a long time. Grant had learned from us even before the dinner. Grant had learned from us even before the dinner. He had recognized Ruby as a risk. Children notice what adults explain away. In one file, tied to a woman named Beatrice Rowe, there was a note that said, "Subject responds strongly to late husband's military language. Need phrases around duty, honor, finishing the work." In another, tied to a retired pastor, the note said, "Use forgiveness frame, resistance as bitterness." Not property profiles. Grief profiles. That discovery expanded the case again. More families were contacted. More old wounds reopened. And this is where I learned something unpleasant about truth. Truth does not always feel kind when it arrives late. Some people were grateful. Some were angry at us for telling them. One woman said, "I had finally made peace with what happened. Why would you take that away?" I had no good answer. Because peace built on a lie can still feel like shelter. Tearing it down may be necessary, but necessary is not the same as gentle. Mara handled those calls better than I did. She learned to say, "You do not have to decide what this means today. We only wanted you to have the truth that was kept from you." That sentence became part of the Foundation's outreach. Not every truth demands immediate action. Sometimes it only asks not to be buried again. The server also gave us the final piece of Grant's revenge against himself. He had kept rankings. Not just values. Rankings. Property potential. Emotional access. Resistance likelihood. Conversion difficulty. Family fracture opportunities. Our family had a note beside it. High emotional yield. Public legacy angle. Daughter influence strong. Father pride manageable with staged resistance. There was that word again. Manageable. I printed that page and kept it for exactly 1 day. Long enough to hate it properly. Then I brought it to Windmere and placed it on the dining room table where the blue packet had once waited. Mara, Ruby, and I looked at it together. Then Ruby took a red marker and wrote one word across it. Wrong. We framed that copy and hung it in the private office, not the public hallway. Not because visitors needed to see it. Because we did. Some families hang inspirational quotes. We hung an insult that failed. Wrong. A small red correction over a predator's plan. That became the final private revenge. Grant had tried to define us inside his folders. Ruby edited him. Winter came early that year. The marsh froze at the edges. Wind rattled the old windows. The house needed repairs we could barely afford because justice does not replace storm damage and donors prefer grand missions to plumbing. One Saturday, Mara and I spent 6 hours labeling storage bins in the upstairs hall. Old concert programs. Eleanor's teaching books. Foundation files. Legal archives. Ruby's early drawings. Evidence copies, sealed and stored. At the bottom of one box, we found a cassette tape. Eleanor's handwriting on the label. Mara, age 6, terrible song about frogs. We found an old player in the closet. The tape hissed. Then Eleanor laughed. Real Eleanor. Not polished. Not cleaned. Not restored. Just laughing while 6-year-old Mara sang loudly about a frog who wanted shoes. Mara covered her mouth. Ruby leaned closer, fascinated. Then little Mara's voice shouted from decades ago, "Mom, don't laugh. This is serious music." And Eleanor, still laughing, said, "The serious things are allowed to be funny too." We played that part 3 times. Not for evidence. For us. That tape did what the trial could not. It returned Eleanor to the house without making her useful to anyone. No lesson. No property instruction. No legal clarity. Just a mother laughing at a frog song. That was when I understood the deepest repair. We did not only need to protect Eleanor's wishes. We needed to recover her uselessness. The parts of her that did not serve a case. The jokes. The lemons. The bad piano days. The dry cookies. The way she mispronounced one neighbor's last name for 20 years and refused correction because she said tradition had rights. Grant had turned her into function. Guidance. Pressure. Authority. Legacy. We had to let her become ordinary again. Loved people deserve that. They should not have to spend eternity as symbols. After that, we started Eleanor Nights. Once a month, no legal talk, no foundation talk, no grant, no court, no fraud, no documents. Only ordinary memories. Mara told Ruby about the time Eleanor burned soup and blamed the pot. I told them about the night Eleanor threw a slipper at a raccoon on the porch and apologized to it afterward. Harriet told one story Eleanor would have denied completely, which is how we knew it was probably true. Ruby brought new questions every month. What was Grandma bad at? What made Grandma mad? Did Grandma ever lie? Did Grandma snore? Mara answered all of them. Plainly. No saint-making. No ghost polishing. That mattered. Because a real memory, with flaws, is harder to hijack than a perfect one. Perfect people are easy for liars to impersonate. Real people have edges. Edges catch falsehood. By spring, Windmere felt less like a crime scene and more like a house again. Not innocent. Never again innocent. But honest. And honesty can be a stronger kind of safety than innocence ever was. On the first warm day, Ruby and I carried the old blue packet cover to the fire pit. The documents inside were evidence copies, so those stayed archived. But the empty cover, the symbol of the thing, had been released back to us. Ruby asked if burning it was dramatic. I said yes. She asked if dramatic was allowed. I said sometimes. She thought about that and nodded. Then say something before we burn it. I looked at the blue cover in my hands. For months it had represented danger. But looking at it there in daylight, it seemed cheap. Blue cardstock. Silver clip. Nothing. That is the strange final insult of evil. It uses ordinary materials. Paper. Ink. A folder. A voice file. A phrase. A locked drawer. Then fear gives those things weight. I tossed the cover into the fire pit. No more decisions made in fog, I said. Ruby considered that. Good enough. She lit the match with Mara standing behind her, one hand ready but not grabbing. The cover burned badly at first. It curled. Smoked. Resisted. Then the flame took it. Ruby watched until it was ash. Then she said, "Blue is not a bad color though." Mara laughed. No. Grant doesn't get to keep a whole color. That became another rule. People who hurt you do not get permanent ownership of ordinary things. Not colors. Not songs. Not rooms. Not words like legacy or renewal or trust. You take them back carefully. One at a time. That is slow revenge. The kind nobody applauds. The kind that actually frees you. So yes, the public revenge was strong. A stage. A projector. A live stream. A fake voice exposed in front of the people it was meant to fool. A man who believed he had made an old father manageable, learning that witnesses changed the weight of a room. But the final revenge was quieter. It was Ruby using blue paint again. It was Mara saying legacy without flinching. It was me listening to Eleanor's real laugh and not immediately thinking of evidence. It was Windmere full of children who did not know Grant's name and did not need to. That is how you know a wound has started becoming history. Not when you forget. When the next generation is allowed to enter the room without carrying the weapon that made the wound. If there is one final image I want you to keep, it is this. A White House above the marsh. Windows open. Piano slightly out of tune. A girl with silver shoes now too small sitting on the floor painting a dollhouse attic yellow. Her mother beside her, sorting sheet music. An old man on the porch pretending to read while listening to every sound inside. No blue packet. No borrowed ghost. No polite theft hiding under beautiful words. Just a family, damaged but awake, living inside the promise someone tried to steal. That was Eleanor's victory. That was Ruby's victory. That was ours.